All right. I'm on audio good for online folks. Morning to the live stream folks. All right, so last week we kind of hit, or really the first 2 weeks, kind of an overview of how the king was unexpected and a fruition of how the kingdom was unexpected. Today we're going to kind of turn into more how the life of people who live within God's kingdom, what's expected of them is turned on its head compared to what's expected of the world. And I want to start this week where I want to start is kind of what I think is the paradigm for all teaching within the kingdom. So like, I'm a follower of Jesus. I recognize him as king. I'm trying to walk for him, live for him. How does that express itself in my life? The teaching today, what I'm going to try to let it be is everything that we do should be viewed through this lens. Because I actually do think this is the primary foundational truth of a servant of Jesus in today. So we'll start Matthew chapter 20. We're going to start at verse 20. So Matthew 20:20. Then the mother of Zebedee's sons came to Jesus with her sons, and kneeling down, asked a favor of him. "What is it you want?" he asked. She said, "Grant that one of these 2 sons of mine may sit at your right, and the other at your left in your kingdom." "You don't know what you are asking," Jesus said to them. "Can you drink the cup I'm going to drink?" "We can," they answered. Jesus said to them, "You will indeed drink from my cup, but to sit at my right or left is not for me to grant. These places belong to those for whom they have been prepared, by my Father." Okay, so let's pause for a second. It's at this point, all the disciples, they recognize who Jesus is. Everybody's like, all right, this is the Messiah, the Christ that was to come. He is the king that we've expected. We know who he is. So 2 of the 12 get their mama. And side note, if you have to get your mama in order to help you make a request of something you want, and you're a grown man, automatically red flags should be going off, right? This is probably not appropriate if I have to pull my mama in to help me make this request. And what's the request? We recognize your king. Give my boys the positions of or position. Give them the positions of position, of authority, of esteem, of power. This is what I want. And Jesus, look, he tries to make it clear to him, this comes with strings attached, what you're asking. There's going to be hardships and persecution and major suffering. You sure you want this? And they're like, yeah, give it to me. And Jesus ultimately says, yeah, you're going to get it, but you're going to get that, but it's not for me to hand out these positions. Okay? That sits. They go on. Jesus tells them no, essentially, not mine to give. Then what happens? When the 10 heard about this, they were indignant with the 2 brothers. Jesus called them together and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their high officials exercise authority over them. Not so with you. Instead, whoever wants to become great among you must be your servant, and whoever wants to be first must be your slave. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve, and to give his life as a ransom for many." So, the boys ask what they ask. Jesus tells them, no, not mine to give. There's a poll right there, Colin. I'm back and forth. Yeah, that's right. The other disciples get word of it, and they are hacked, right? I mean, they're like, and why are they hacked? Why are they hacked? They want the same thing, and they're ticked because they didn't think of it first. Like Jared said, why didn't I apply it? So like involved in this is like they're already like, I wanted that. Like the scheming comes into play. I wish I had schemed. Maybe I could have schemed better. And it like their anger kind of betrays their heart, right? It reveals what they're after, their understanding of Jesus' kingdom, like how they're thinking about Jesus' kingdom.
I just have a question. I was just thinking, had they already argued about who was going to be greatest, or does that come after this?
I don't know, because the Gospels aren't linear. You know what I'm saying, Otis?
That's what
Yeah. So it's revealing on a host of fronts, right? Like their own hearts, their understanding of what this kingdom's going to be, all kinds of stuff, right? So Jesus gets word of it, and it's important enough for Jesus that he rounds them all up and is like, I have to correct this error, right? And so he does. He's like, look, what you're asking for, there's my wife, Robert and Kathy. What you're asking for is like, it is a fundamental misunderstanding of how my kingdom is going to operate. Okay? You're operating under the assumption, under the presumption that my kingdom operates like the worldly kingdoms. That what you're asking for, these positions of power and authority and position and title, like, yeah, that's how the world operates. Gentile rulers take their position and their authority and they use it to subjugate. They lord it over the people that are part and parcel of their kingdom. He's like, that is not how you determine greatness or leadership or any merit within my kingdom. Within my kingdom, we're turning that upside down. In the worldly kingdoms, the lowly class are the ones that do the lowly things, servanthood, the thankless jobs. In the world, that's the low class. And the people of esteem, they don't get their hands dirty, either with dirty work or with dirty people. Within my kingdom, I'm flipping it upside down. Within my kingdom, greatness is defined as the people who do that stuff. Greatness is defined as servanthood. Greatness in leadership, greatness in anything. And it was so fundamental. Then he says, look, and I'm not passing on to you some teaching that I myself am not doing. Your king, the king that you claim to follow, like this is what his life is. Just as the Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve and give his life as a ransom for many. So in this one, like fail swoop, Jesus turns greatness, leadership, position on its head, and like in my kingdom, the leaders are going to be the ones who get their hands dirty. The leaders are going to be the ones who associate with low people. This is what it means to be great in Jesus' kingdom. Flip over to 1 Corinthians chapter 12, because I don't want you to think that this is like a one-off. 1 Corinthians chapter 12. So, in this section, Paul is discussing spiritual gifts. And it's like within this church they were having problems or whatever. And it was kind of the same stuff. It was like people were clamoring they wanted the public gifts versus the lowly gifts, and there were factions, and like they were dividing up. And so Paul, through the Holy Spirit, gives them a teaching like, look, God put you all together. All these gifts are needed. But there's this little section in 1 Corinthians 12 I want you to notice, verse 22. It's in this context of spiritual gifts. On the contrary, those parts of the body that seem to be weaker are indispensable. And the parts we think are less honorable, we treat with special honor. And the parts that are unpresentable are treated with special modesty, while our presentable parts need no special treatment. But God has combined the members of the body and has given greater honor to the parts that lacked it. Here's what I want you to see in this. Like this, what Jesus is teaching in that first section, Matthew 20, it carried over into the kingdom age, into the church age. And they were still dealing with the same stuff. Like people were still wanting the upfront parts that got the acclaim and got the attention and all that. And Paul's having to correct them. And notice what he says there. It's the same thing. Like within the church body, those who take on that lowly stuff, those are the ones that we as a church body give special honor and acclaim to. I mean, I just think about it like, who all has preached or taught publicly, like from time to time? Raise your hand if you have. A good many. How many of you, like, how often is it that you do your little spiel, right? You do your teaching and people come up to you afterwards and like, man, that was a great job. Like, is that pretty regular? Every once in a while. Y'all? Yeah, like, point being like a lot of the, how do I say this? We misappropriate value or misapply value within the kingdom. Like if you left it to Gary Osborne, you're like, Gary, I want you to put together. You have a church draft, okay? Like a fantasy football draft, but you get a church draft, right? And I'm going to leave it to you. You put together like a super church. Well, you know what my error is going to be, right? My error is going to be, and everybody else's is probably too, by the way. I'm going to choose like the flashies. I'm going to choose the great speakers and like the dynamic personalities and all this. And like this is the teaching of 1 Corinthians 12 right here. You don't understand like how Jesus values what's going on within the church body. You have totally got your money ball of church like all screwed up. You way overestimate the importance of the public flashy roles, and you way underestimate the nitty-gritty that you don't think is sustaining a church body, but it is. I think my classic example, and Colin heard me say this Monday morning, my classic example of this, for years, like even during the Duck Dynasty years, we'd have hundreds and hundreds of people coming, right? And there was all kinds of stuff going on. And there was this dude, Ryan Hammett, that every Sunday morning got here about an hour early to make coffee. And like he made big old vats of coffee, and everybody, all these visitors were coming through, and like their first interaction with a human being at Whites Ferry Road was with the guy, giving them coffee. And about half of them ended up, Ryan would invite them to his house to eat lunch. And they would get, they would see the hands and feet of Jesus. Another example I've always used, like one of the giants of our church body is Josh's father-in-law, Mac Owen. Like, and you look at Mac now, Mac is he's like some kind of national director for Celebrate Recovery, and he travels all over, he does this and that. Yeah, but that began with about, 8 people in the church parking lot for 10 years in a little brick house. Just a lowly deal, and just pouring into people as they came in. And those 10 years were the foundation that then started Whites Ferry Road Celebrate Recovery, which were the foundations of, kind of what it is now. I say all this to say, like, even it is your own human bias. You can't escape that you're going to overvalue what Jesus doesn't overvalue, okay? So there's kind of my foundations. I want to take us through now a story of Jesus where he encountered a situation, then gave two parables that kind of flesh this out. So that's where we'll spend most of the rest of our time, and that's in Luke 14. We'll start in verse 7, I guess. Let's start at verse 1. I'm going to read the whole thing, and then we'll go back through. Luke 14, verse 1. One Sabbath, when Jesus went to eat in the house of a prominent Pharisee, he was being carefully watched. There in front of him was a man suffering from dropsy. Does anybody else have a different word? I think it's abnormal swelling. Abnormal swelling. So I've never heard the term dropsy. If anybody has, I don't know what that is, but abnormal swelling or dropsy. Verse 3. Jesus asked the Pharisees and experts in the law, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath or not?" But they remained silent. So taking hold of the man, he healed him and sent him away. Then he asked them, "If one of you has a son or an ox that falls into a well on the Sabbath day, will you not immediately pull him out?" And they had nothing to say. When he noticed how the guests picked the places of honor at the table, he told them this parable. When someone invites you to a wedding feast, do not take the place of honor, for a person more distinguished than you may have been invited. If so, the host who invited both of you will come and say to you, "Give this man your seat." Then, humiliated, you will have to take the least important place. But when you are invited, take the lowest place, so that when your host comes, he will say to you, "Friend, move up to a better place." Then you will be honored in the presence of all your fellow guests. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, and he who humbles himself will be exalted. Then Jesus said to his host, "When you give a luncheon or a dinner, do not invite your friends or brothers or relatives or rich neighbors. If you do, they may invite you back, and so you will be repaid. But when you give a banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, and you will be blessed. Although they cannot repay you, you will be repaid at the resurrection of the righteous." So first I want to key in on that first parable that Jesus teaches there, verse 7 through 11, the low seat parable, right? So we pick, I think now, especially our age, most of us are older. I don't see any young people here. Like, we tease millennials about this exact thing, right? They get a bad rap for a supposed tendency to feel entitled, a tendency to feel that they deserve privileges that they don't merit. But that ain't unique to millennials. That's everybody. And so today we start from this point. Jesus wants his followers not only to be willing to take the lowest seat, the lowest position, not just be willing to take it, but to actively seek it out. Seek out the lowest seat, then plant our butts there and stay there until he moves us to a different spot. Does this sound like our world today? No, because it ain't. So that's the teaching. Like, within my kingdom, here's what I want you to do. Find the low spot. Seek it out. Stay there until the Master, who is God Almighty, shoves you from that seat and moves you to a different one. Now, what I want to talk about is the effects that, if I do that, what effects does it have on me? Number one, if I actually live that out, I have no choice but to be content in God. If I'm a man that seeks out the low position, then I'm not going to get my identity from the approval of others. I'm not relying on my position for my identity. If I seek out the low spot and am totally content with staying there, then where is my contentment found? Where is my identity? This is a process that changes the heart, because I can't rely on the crutch of approval for my value and my worth. The world will be looking on me as unimportant. But if I'm truly content, even in a place of humility, then the only source of my contentment, the only source it could be, the only possible source of it is in Christ alone. If I adopt this heart that Jesus is teaching here, it changes my heart. I must depend on Christ for my identity. I must recognize it is not my position or achievement or approval of others that gives me value. It is that Christ loves me. Number 2, it helps me live in a posture of trusting God. So I'll tell a story, and it's a weird one. So I think part of the American spirit is we tend to be go-getters, make it happen, and like we value that, right? We exalt people who identify what they want and go out and take it. So, man, it's been a while, but I watched one of the weirdest documentaries I've ever watched. I'm a sucker. What was it? Well, there was coffee all down it, and I was afraid if I drank it was gonna spill on me. See, that's weird. There's coffee. That's why I could have wiped it, but it was like. Okay. That was a little weird. All right, the documentary. It was called The Last Great Magnificent, and it was the life story of a chef called Jeremiah Tower. And it was a Bourdain documentary. I'm a sucker. I was a sucker for Bourdain. Did you see it? Yeah, I was a fan. I was a big fan. And Bourdain was a foodie's foodie, right? And so, like, once he got really powerful and popular, like, he was given the latitude to do passion projects. And one of the passion projects was a biographical documentary of this guy named Jeremiah Tower. Has anybody ever heard of Jeremiah Tower? All right. So this is who he was. He was the first ever celebrity chef. Like, before Emerald, before Bobby Flay, any of those guys, he was the first. And he came to power. He was on the cover of every culinary magazine. He was at the pinnacle of his career, like in the late 80s, early 90s. And at the pinnacle of his career, he quit and moved to Mexico, and nobody's ever heard of him since. And so this was a biography of this dude. And so it started with his life story. And he came from a very, very wealthy family. And they would, like, travel all the time. And, like, in their traveling, it was like everybody's seen Titanic, right? So, like, that was his family. Like, who was the heroine in Titanic, the chick? Whatever her name was, that she lived and the other dude died. That was his family. Like, you don't. I asked the name, Jared. Why are you laughing? You could have given me the name, whatever her name was. Rose. Okay, Rose. There you go. I don't remember. That was Tower's family. They were uber wealthy. They would go to the best places and the best accommodation, like luxurious. And that was his life growing up. It was like one trip to the next. And you might think that kind of thing was enviable, and you'd be wrong, because essentially when his family traveled, his parents just abandoned him. He was an only child. They would set him up in the nicest accommodations and then see you later for the entire trip. So when Tower was young, like really young, like 8 years old, young, not like 8 years old. When he was 8 years old, they went on this trip to Australia to see the Great Barrier Reef. And one day on that trip, and Tower basically, because he had no one, he would eventually, like on all this, what he gravitated toward was the kitchen staff. That's who he would hang out with. And that's how he got into cooking, by the way, too. But when he was on this trip to Australia to see the Great Barrier Reef, one day he was walking by himself on the beach, and he saw a large local fisherman carrying a fish. It was a mahi-mahi, and he was fascinated by it. So he kind of went up to the dude and struck up a conversation with him. Now again, he's 8 years old. So the two of them ended up cleaning the fish. They started a fire on the beach and like got banana leaves and wrapped it, and they were cooking the fish, or some kind of leaves, I think it was banana leaves. They were cooking the fish on an open fire right there. They talked in the evening, enjoying their meal. I mean, this took hours and hours and hours, and ultimately that night, the 8-year-old Jeremiah Tower was sexually abused by this man. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was after all that happened, the night was over, Tower went back to the hotel and he found his parents drinking with their friends, and he told them that he had been at the beach for hours. He didn't even tell them about the sexual assault. And his parents' response was, "We didn't even realize you had been gone." This is what Tower's quote was on that documentary. He said, "It was at that point right there that I realized I was on my own. The only one who cared for me in this world would be me." Living in a way that Jesus talks about in this parable, seeking out the low seat, does something different to my mindset and my heart. So think about this. If I'm willing to live a life where I seek out humble places, and if I'm willing to stay there until God moves me, this requires me to trust God. It requires me to understand that my God is in control and produces in me a conviction that my God is good, that I am not on my own. There is another in this world who is real and who is there, who cares for me, who will help me, who sees after me and wants the best for me. God is doing something in this process. He is grooming me or you for the next chair. So think about some of the great ones of the Bible that this has exactly happened to. Paul, he's like in the Christian Hall of Fame, right? Wrote 2/3 of the New Testament, evangelized the Gentile world. Saul gets blinded, comes to Jesus, right? And what happens to Paul? Right after that, he gets converted. Then what happens? 14 years in Arabia, and we hear nothing about him. 14 years, we hear nothing. Moses, he was given position and authority and power, right? And he tries to seize upon that. Tries to assert himself as, "I'm the man." Stands up for his people. Boom, where does he go? Deserts of Midian, 40 years. Both those dudes were humbled in that, shepherded. And afterwards, you can especially see it in Moses, his leadership style looked really, really different, right? So too, living like this puts me in a posture of trusting God. Number three, third thing it does. It keeps me from being idle and downing the good work of others. So think about this again. What's the context of this parable? This low seat, when you're at a banquet, take the low seat. That's verses 1-6, right? It's a Sabbath day. Jesus goes to a prominent Pharisee's house. He walks in, and like there's an elephant in the room, right? It's what I think about this dude. What did they say it was again? Abnormal swelling, but dropsy, yeah. Okay. So what I'm thinking is like wonder. I'm thinking Augie, right? Like you remember in that movie, like nobody would look at Augie. Like that's the kind of the picture that's being painted that's going on here. There's a dude, something's obviously wrong with him, and everybody's like, don't look at him. It's like everybody's over there. So the feel you get, it's almost like they invited Jesus just so they could catch him doing something wrong. Jesus gets in the home. It's obvious that's the elephant in the room. And then you kind of get the feel from this passage that everybody's ignoring that guy. There's something wrong with him. And apparently no one has even lifted a finger to check to see if he's okay, to see if there's anything they could do to make him more comfortable. And so Jesus steps up and confronts the situation. He asks them, is it against the law to heal somebody on the Sabbath? And what's the response? There is no response. They don't even say no, it's not lawful. Like, nothing. Why? Why was their response no response? They were paralyzed by their position. Their own haughtiness, pride, concern of what others would think about them if they said anything. Think about this. Not only did it paralyze their action, like it caused them to want to paralyze the action of everyone else. Like the mood in the room is like, oh, did anybody see, this is totally weird and off topic, but it relates. Did anybody see the China CCP conference? The former leader, Hu Jintao. They basically Xi Jinping, he's the leader, he's been the leader for 10 years, and they're changing the constitution to let him be leader for his life, right? Well, the dude that was in power before him, his name's Hu Jintao, all right? So this was Friday night. It's like the last night of the communist conference. Jintao sitting beside Xi Jinping. So the current ruler, the former ruler. And all of a sudden, ushers come in and try to get the old dude, you're getting out of here. He's like, what's going on? So basically it's like muscling, you're fisting to be disappeared, you former dude. I don't know what he did to offend Xi Jinping. But what my point of saying this is, they got him up finally, kind of wrestled him out of his chair, and he's trying to get the current Xi Jinping to talk to him, and he's like, yeah. The dude that's sitting next to the old guy, he tries to stand up to give him hey man, it's okay, this sort of thing. The dude sitting next to him, as he's stepping up to pat him on the back, you can see it. He grabs his jacket. He's like, sit back down. So as they're walking the former leader out, Hu Jintao, there's a line of people sitting right here, and all of them, it is everything in their ability. This is what they're doing. They're like, ooh, I can't look at this dude. I can't. Because what are they afraid of? They're like, if I give any moral support, I might be the next one to get whacked, right? That's the feel here. It is crickets. It's like if I speak up, I'm going to be associated with this dude. I don't want to be associated with this dude. Their perceived position trapped them. It trapped them into being so concerned about what others thought about them. It trapped them in the lie. So it's the same thing. It traps me in the lie that some jobs and some work and some people are below me. If I do those jobs or I associate with those people, what would others think about me? And it's the same. I think my son's dealing with some of this too right now, actually. It's funny. But it's the same thing. How many times have I not stepped up and reached out to a person or involved myself in something? Celebrate Recovery, re-engage or whatever it is, because I'm afraid of how I will be perceived by other people. When I misplace my value and my identity within the kingdom, it traps me in really a prison of my own making. It makes me ineffective. Next, it forces me to view others as Jesus views them. It blesses me with relationships I wouldn't otherwise have. So look at the parable after the parable I've been referring to. Basically, when you give a big banquet, invite people who can't pay you back. Invite people that you wouldn't associate with, or whatever that others wouldn't associate with. If I'm a man or a woman, if I'm a follower of Jesus that is content in the low seat, then I'm regarding me as what I truly am. I'm looking at myself honestly. I'm a sinner who is loved by the Redeemer, and so are other people. High position, low position, abnormal swelling, facial deformity, it don't matter. I'm worthy and they are worthy because God made them in His image and loved them enough to die for them. If I'm a man who's caught up in my own haughtiness and pride, caught up in what others think about me, caught up in my own position, then I'm doing a lot of screening of who I'm willing to associate with. Why? Because I think that it might hurt my stock in other people's eyes. Look at verse 14 there. Where is it? Is it? I've lost. There it is. When you invite those kind of people, when you associate with them, verse 14, you will be blessed. Let me tell you how true that is. So, and I bet you can relate too, and you for that matter. So, I came from a middle-class family. I've never done an illegal drug in my life. Like, my parents were good, solid. And then, I don't know, I opened myself to this, and like, all of a sudden I look up and like, my closest friends in my life, some of them were like former heroin addicts, and like, and they blessed. My point in saying all this is like, they are some of my closest friends and have blessed my life stupidly, just ridiculously. And if I'd have been caught up in haughtiness or whatever, like, what are people going to think about me? I can't imagine how many good things I would have missed out on in my own life and the life of my family, how they've affected my kids, how their kids are friends with my kids, and all that kind of stuff. So, anywho. All right, I'll close with this. Turn over to John 13. About verse 14, 15, somewhere in there. So everybody knows this story of Jesus washing the disciples' feet. Jesus did the washing, and then he provided a teaching. Verse 14. Now that I, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you should also wash one another's feet. I have set you an example that you should do as I have done for you. Very truly, I tell you, no servant is greater than his master, nor is a messenger greater than the one who sent him. So Jesus washed their feet. He gave them this little teaching. But just having that teaching wasn't enough. Having that knowledge was not what Jesus was after. It didn't produce what Jesus desired for them to have, and that's why Jesus said this in the very next verse, and this is what I'll close this out with. Verse 17. Now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. So I guess that's my charge and challenge for us today. Go and do them and be blessed. Love you guys.